First, I introduce myself. My name is Marit. I'm working at Holisticon as an Agile coach. And yeah, who or what is Holisticon? We're a consulting agency, and we're offering IT management consulting services. Our core services are software engineering, software architecture, process automatization, and agile transformation and organizational development. And in 2019, we started collaborating with Michael Hamman on the topic of leadership agility. And he was in Hamburg and delivered a great workshop. He did a great workshop with us, very mind shifting. And who's Michael? Michael has a vast experience from training and developing coaches, managers, and leaders. And he's also the author of Evolve Agility, Growing an Agile Leadership Culture from the Inside Out. And he's the co-founder of Agile Leadership Institute and Evolve Agility LLC. And he gives his time for a four-part webinar series and on leadership agility in a VUCA world. And today will be the last part of this four-part series. And I will post the agenda in the chat in a minute, and then I'll hand over to Michael, and thank you for being here and taking your time with us.
Well, greetings, everybody, and welcome back. Many faces we've seen before. And so I'm Michael Hamman, for those of you who haven't met me. And the purpose of this series is to establish a way of talking about and thinking about leadership, agile leadership. And the word leadership is a bit problematic, and some people in the agile world react against the word leadership, and I'm not one of those people myself. And part of my intention in the work that I do, and certainly the work in this series, is to help us reframe how we think about leadership, what leadership is, and certainly what leadership agility is. And so I want to start by saying that I define leadership as a willingness and a capacity to take responsibility for one's world and to move past the limitations that prevent one from acting in a leaderful way in the world. So that's how I tend to define leadership. Now, this doesn't exclude the role of the organizational leader or manager. So I want to be really clear about that. But I'm not saying that, as some people in the agile world say, we don't really need leaders and managers. We absolutely do. It's just that their role is different. So in the previous 3 sessions, I've been focusing more on that kind of everywhere leadership, the way that I just now defined it. I use the term everywhere leadership. And today, I'm going to be focusing a bit more on the role of the organizational leader. So I've got some slides I want to walk through. Those of you who've been with me know that this is quite interactive. And so let me just share my screen. Give me a moment to fiddle around here. So the first thing that I want to say, can anyone not, let's see, raise your hand if you can see my screen. Okay, good. Okay, so we're good. All right, good. So, so first of all, I just again want to say welcome and thank you for being here. And so I appreciate, especially those who have been in every session. Appreciate you being here with us. And I also want to extend a warm welcome to my LinkedIn profile. So If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, connect with me. If you have a question or a comment or a thought you'd like to share, please feel free to message me. I'm actually quite responsive on LinkedIn and always enjoy interacting with people. So let's let let's not have this be our last occasion uh, to be together. All right. Okay. So as I said, the session today is going to focus on organizational leadership and management. And I want to do just a brief recap, especially for those of you who haven't been in the series. In this series, there are 5 main ideas, and I'm going to go through these really quickly so we can get to today's topic. So the first main idea is that what we're talking about here, so this is all within the context of the recognition that we live in a VUCA world, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the nature of the world we live in. We may not like it, we may not want it, and that's the nature of the world that we live in. And so in order to be able to act in a way in which we can be effective in our capacity for leaderful impact in the world, we need to shift from a predict and plan orientation of mind, a predict and plan way of relating to reality, if you will, if I can bring in the topic of reality. A shift from a predict and plan way of relating to reality to a sense and respond. And what do I mean by predict and plan? I mean that I'm not saying give up plans and give up predictions. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that a predict and plan mindset identifies with and relies on the illusion that the world is predictable and gets upset when things don't happen that way. So that's how I define a predict and plan mindset. Now, here's the thing. Most of us live in a predict and plan mindset. That's the kind of orientation into which we were all born. Like it or not, that's how it is for us as human beings. So the nature of the transformation that the current world is calling for us as human beings is to shift from a reliance on predictability to a recognition that the world is not predictable, and the capacity to be able to be with the unpredictable, volatile, complex, and ambiguous nature of the world we're in. And that's what I refer to as a sense and respond approach, or sense and respond orientation with respect to reality. So what we're talking about here is a shift in consciousness. And I really think that we need to bring in the language of consciousness into the world that we're operating in. I mean, I've been consulting and working with organizations for more than 20 years now. And we can no longer pretend that we're not talking about how people think, feel, and make sense of the world. The host has asked me to start my video. Am I on my Zoom line here?
Yeah,
Sorry.
we only see your photo.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, let me change that. Oh, that's terrible. Okay, thank you for letting me know. Okay. All right, good. All right. This. Okay, good. So that's the first main idea. The second main idea is, I suppose I have to, okay. The second main idea is that sense and respond organization. So if we talk about the kinds of organizations, so we're going to shift from the focus on individual consciousness. We want to open the lens out into the organizational realm. And in the Agile world, we talk about organizational agility. So in order to have high-performing Agile teams, we need organizations that are inherently Agile. We need, in other words, sense and respond organizations. And a lot of people in the Agile world recognize this. The thing is that for the most part, when we talk about organizational agility or creating sense and respond organizations, we tend to focus on the exterior aspects of the organization, on structures, systems, processes, procedures, all of that kind of stuff, right? And when we talk of, even when we talk about organizational culture, we tend to talk about it as though it's something out there. We need to change the culture as though it's something that exists out there. Organizational culture, I would assert, occurs as much in each one of us as it does somewhere out there. All right. So sense and respond organizations require sense and respond minds. In other words, in order to have organizational agility, we have to have inner agility within the people and individuals who work and live in those organizations. So that's the second main idea. The third main idea that we've been exploring through this whole series is that sense and respond leadership. So I'm introducing leadership in a particular way, again, in the sense of an everywhere leadership, which includes organizational leaders and managers, but also includes anyone else who is willing to take responsibility for their world. Sense and respond leadership is the ability to create that which does not yet exist. And I'm not talking about just products and services that a company produces. By create that which does not exist, I mean create perhaps a way of making sense of our world that doesn't yet exist. So what precedes any new idea which could lead to a new product or service in any company, what precedes that is a different way of making sense of the current world. I don't have time to elaborate that right now, but let that kind of settle wherever it settles, that any new idea, any new product, any new service is always preceded by a shift in how people are making sense of the current reality. New products and services, new ideas, innovation doesn't just come about. It comes about as a product of a different way of making sense. And what I'm saying in this third main idea is that sense and respond leadership is the ability to create that which does not exist and to help other people do the same. Okay, so that's the third main idea. The fourth main idea is that sense and respond leadership is a systemic phenomenon. A moment ago, I used the term everywhere leadership. So sense and respond leadership is not just that which happens at the top of the organization. So we have to give up complaining that executive leaders and managers don't get agile. And instead, I invite us to look in ourselves and see where in ourselves are we not getting agility? Where in ourselves are we not coming from a sense and respond place? All right. So sense and respond leadership is a systemic phenomenon, right? Now, this is going to be important given the particular topic that we're covering today. And then finally, relationship is the primary carrier for a sense and respond culture. So in a sense and respond organization operating in a capacity to be able to perform and function and be effective in a VUCA world, relationships are primary. Relationships are key. And so we did a little bit of work with relationship last time. So these are the 5 main ideas that have been animating the conversations and the work that we've done in these last 3 webinars. Okay, good. So today the focus is going to be on organization and organizational leadership. All right. So we're shifting from, we're not necessarily shifting from a focus on everywhere leadership, but we're bringing a particular focus to the role of the organizational leader and manager. Now, notice I said role, right? So an organizational leader and manager has the same um, requirement to grow within themselves the capacity for sense and respond leadership or leadership agility, the way we've been talking about it. But they also have a particular role. And their particular role is to catalyze the emergence of, of agility in the organizations, including inner agility. All right. So let's kind of take a look at what that looks like. All right. Now I'm going to be painting very broad strokes here, right? This is material that typically takes certainly a day or two to cover. And really to go deep into it, there are long-term programs that I do with Agile coaches and leaders and managers where we dive very deeply into this stuff, but we just want to paint some broad strokes. So, and what's going to happen just incidentally is that I'm going to make quite a number of remarks, and I'll check in with people, find out how this is going, and then at some point we'll have more of a conversation or a dialogue around this. Okay, so I want to introduce a way of thinking about organizations. All right, and I want to introduce it in terms of first, second, and third person perspective. For the most part, when we think of organizations, we tend to think of organizations purely in terms of the objectively observable aspects of the organization. And I want to expand that. I feel that we need a more expanded view of the nature of the organization if we are to be able, as in our roles as leaders and managers, and by the way, if you're coaches, you also have a role as a leader. You may not think of it that way, but you do. So I want to expand the nature of the perspectives that we hold when we talk about and think about organizations. And so I want to propose this in terms of first, second, and third person perspectives. Some of you may remember this from grammar school. I'm adjusting this just a little bit to make this work. All right, so there's first person perspective, which is my subjective I perspective. We could say that is the perspective of consciousness. So when we practice meditation, for instance, that is an exploration of our own consciousness. And we devoted one of the sessions to exploring what adult developmental psychology can help us understand about the nature of subjective experience and how we can grow the complexity of our own subjective experience. So at any given moment, we view the world in relation to our subjective experience of the world. And that's what we mean by first person perspective. Second person perspective is the perspective of relationship. Whenever two or more people come together, what happens is something that we refer to as relationship. And relationship is an emergent phenomenon. And you could say that in relationship, there's a kind of shared consciousness which emerges. And it's not something that can necessarily, okay, actually, let me back up. We can either be accidental about our relationship, in which case relationships just kind of are the way that we are, and we seem to not have very much power to shift those relationships, or we can be deliberate in our capacity to bring attention to the nature of our relationships in order to continue to grow and evolve the quality and the the performing power of those relationships. So that's the second person perspective. And we did a little bit of work in that domain during our last session 2 weeks ago. And then there's the third person perspective, which is the perspective of observable structures, processes, systems, procedures, And this is the territory that we usually think of when we think of organizations. And I'd like to suggest, by the way, this model here can be expanded out, for those of you who are familiar with this model, into Ken Wilber's 4-quadrant model, the integral model, which is a model that Michael Spade has done a lot of work in over the years in creating integral agile. So when we think of the organization, we want to think in terms of all three of these perspectives. It's a three-dimensional perspectival way of looking at the organization. If we're only looking at the third person structures, processes, systems, and all that, if we only look at that aspect of the organization, we are missing the total complexity. And while that sort of myopic focus on third person may have worked in the 20th century, it's doubtful that it ever did. It certainly will not work in a VUCA world. We need to be able to see the greater complexity. All right, so, okay. So I want to introduce, okay, let me go meta for a moment. So in talking about the organizational sphere, it's a huge, enormous topic. And so I'm just taking a tiny slice, as I have done with all of the topics throughout this series. All right. So I want to introduce a model that for me captures really, really well my experience. So all of what I'm talking about throughout this whole series, and certainly today as well, is based on my experience as a consultant, as a coach, but also in research that I've been doing. So in all of my work with organizations, I have always combined research, like studying what have researchers discovered in the relevant areas in which I'm working. So combining research with on the ground practice. So that's the way I have always worked. And I feel that it's borderline unethical to work any other way. I use research to help expand my thinking and to inform my methods for how I approach things when I'm actually in organizations, in the heat of battle within organizations. And by the way, I include research into myself. So when I talk about research, I also talk about like continuing to expand my own self-awareness and my own capacity to manage my reactions. So this is, I'm introducing one research-based model that I feel really captures the way that I have been thinking about approaching organizations and organizational leadership. And this is from a book by the woman Deborah Rowland and Malcolm Higgs called Sustaining Change. So we're going to unpack this piece by piece. So they look. So what they did in this book is that they studied dozens, maybe hundreds. They interviewed dozens, I think perhaps even hundreds of leaders in terms of how they approached bringing about organizational change and transformation. And they kind of put it together into kind of a set of overall approaches. And I want to just articulate these different approaches piece by piece. So the first thing that they notice is that some leaders and managers tend to take more of a top-down approach, while others tend to take a more self-organized approach. And by self-organized, I mean that they realize that leadership happens when they allow people to self-organize. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? I mean, most of us, I think, are agile practitioners, right? And then the other sort of criteria relates to some leaders regard change as relatively straightforward, and in some cases, change is relatively straightforward. Like, for instance, at some point, I need to get a new laptop. And that's going to be a change that's relatively straightforward. It's not going to completely turn my world upside down. Versus change, understanding change as inherently complex. So for instance, when we bring in a new team member to a team, that's not a straightforward change, although some people think that it is. That is a change which is complex, which is to say that it introduces potential side effects which are hard, if not impossible, to predict. All right. So those are the four sort of criteria or parameters. And since this is all kind of based on social science research, everything fits into a nice 4-quadrant box, and which in this case it does. And so I want to articulate these 4 different approaches. All right. So the first approach that they saw some leaders taking is a directive approach, which is top-down, hierarchical. Steps are prescribed, and the messages and communications are controlled by organizational leaders and managers. All right. And the primary assumption here is that I, as a leader or a manager, I can manage change. This probably sounds familiar to a lot of us, right? In a sense, you could say that to some degree, maybe this is what we do battle with as Agile coaches. All right, so the next one, so notice that this is on the side of that change is related, understood as straightforward. So with a directive approach, the assumption is that change is straightforward, and that change is a top-down sort of approach, right? The second approach, which they call self-assembly, it's a little less common than directive, and it used to be, I think, a little more common than it is now, which is the notion that change happens best when it's self-organized. And so in self-assembly, the what of the change may be determined at the top, but the how is left open. And sometimes it's referred to as a kind of a toolkit approach where leadership and management say, okay, this is where we're going, and here's some tools to help us get there. Now help us get there, right? And sometimes it's called spray and pray strategy. So you throw something out there and then pray that it works, right? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And the basic premise here is to launch enough initiatives and something is bound to stick. So you just keep throwing initiatives out there. So and by the way, oftentimes leadership approaches to change may be a hybrid of some of these. So a common approach to change in a lot of organizations is a hybrid of directive and self-assembly, both of which presume that social and human change is a straightforward matter. Okay, so now let's go to the other side, right? So on the other side, we understand that change is inherently complex. It's not straightforward, that we're dealing with complex systems, and complex systems don't behave like linear systems. They behave completely differently. So a top-down oriented approach that recognizes change as complex is what they refer to as a master approach, which is to articulate an overarching statement, but not prescribe what people will do. So the focus here is on helping people align around a common vision, and then focus on building capability. And the presumption here is trust your people to solve things with you. So there's still an orientation that leadership at the top is guiding the ship, but they see everybody else in the organization as key partners in making that happen. By the way, can you see how this is starting to get to more of the kind of leadership and management that is more I'm going to use efficacious, more effective in a VUCA world. And then finally is one that they refer to as emergent, in which change is governed by very few rules, right? So leadership and management, they're not going to prescribe anything. In fact, they may just offer just the barest sketch of things. And there's a focus on establishing cells, individual groups of people who are working on stuff. All right, this is a bit abstract right now, but we'll kind of unpack this a bit more in just a moment. The thing that I think is really important here is that in an emergent environment, the kinds of macro rules or principles, like for instance, customer focus. Customer focus is way too abstract. Instead, we want to have micro rules. For instance, always serve the customer within 24 hours. So in an organization, with an approach that is oriented toward creating conditions in which organizational transformation emerges, one of the key principles is the establishment of a relatively few number of rules, but those rules need to be micro rules. They need to be rules that point to very specific things. If they're not specific enough, then there's not enough structure in those rules. And then, so the basic presumption here is that we are creating conditions for change. We cannot create change as leaders and managers. The best we can do is to design organizational environments that generate conditions that support the emergence of change. So I want to pause for a few moments and just find out, like, what does this bring to mind for people? And go ahead and start, maybe unmic yourself and just go ahead and start talking, because I can't see everybody on this screen right now. So what does this bring to mind? I want to find if we're tracking together on this.
For me, it's quite easy to read, and I agree with what I read here, but it's really difficult to bring this into practice because some people are really used to giving exact rules to what to do and not to be self-organized. And I would even say some are used to get supervised and micromanaged, and now we start with self-organization. I don't know. It's quite difficult.
You do know. You know exactly. So now, are you speaking from the perspective of the role of a like a coach or a consultant, or are you
as a leader, as a team leader? So
okay,
I have
so
like
you're
a mixed team. Yeah.
Right. So the issue there, I would suggest, is that the larger culture in which that team exists is one that is at variance with the kind of culture that that you're looking to create with this team. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah.
How do I say your name? It's
Pia.
a strange. Pia. Oh, Pia.
Yeah.
Hi, Pia. Yeah. Have we met before?
No, we have not, Michael.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good. So, right. This is this webinar series it's a funny thing, because it's actually what we're talking about here is really complex, right? Now, here's the thing that what you're saying is having me wish that I had brought maybe a different focus in this particular session, which is, how do we help create the conditions when we're not in a leadership, like a role where we have power, right? And but I want to speak just somewhat to that, Pia, and then for the benefit of others, because I suspect you're not the only one with that kind of question. And the thing is that we're always dealing with what is. And we can take an emergent approach ourselves. So, for instance, one of the things we need to be able to do is to recognize what already exists in the organization and to notice what our own preference is. That as consultants and coaches, every one of us has a preference for how those people should be. And we tend to get fixated with our own preference. And the discipline for us is to be able to observe what's here and how can I help what's here make itself to make itself stronger in what it already is. So if it's an organization that has kind of a directive orientation, what is it that they're trying to get to? And to help them get to more of that, while at the same time introducing little pieces here and there to help shift something else. So this is actually, so what we're speaking to right now, Pia, is not ultimately the topic for this webinar.
Okay, sorry.
But I wanted to give something to this concern, because it is a concern. However, I would suggest that that we ourselves can take an emergent approach. An emergence is about starting with where a system is at right now. And if where a system is at is not congruent with itself, for instance, if what we have is a kind of achievement measure metrics oriented organization, we're not going to be able to move beyond that until we've gotten good at that. And most organizations that are metrics oriented are actually not very good at it. Metrics becomes a kind of an ideology. And so where I can best be of service in a culture like that is to find out, so what is it, to help people be clear about what is it you're trying to get to in measuring?
Good point.
What is it that you're wanting more of? And helping people get clear at the underlying desire, or the underlying, maybe not goal, but the underlying purpose, because there's always an underlying purpose. And to help, when we can help people get aligned with the underlying purpose, it helps them shake off the sort of ideological shackles that they otherwise grow around them. And so what I see, for instance, is that, yeah, we do need metrics, but we may not need so many. Rather than 26 metrics, maybe we only need 7 to get to what it is that we're wanting here. And so by helping people get clear about the purpose, it helps people connect to a deeper intelligence, if you will. So again, not quite the topic of this session, but very definitely related. So how has this been helpful for you, Pia?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, to clear the purpose would definitely facilitate adapting to change, I would say. So, and also, I mean, this defining more micro rules, I think this is really something, visible. So everybody can really understand. So instead of just unclear headlines, make it more specific, and then in small steps.
Yes.
Of course, it could work.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael. This is Karthik here from Singapore.
Hi, Karthik.
Hi.
I don't see you on my screen. Usually the person talking shows up on my screen. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm running on a low bandwidth, so you have to you have to excuse me on this one. But
okay, no worries at all, Kartik.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I'm an Agile coach here, working in Singapore. So this is the first session I'm attending yours. Maybe I'll catch up with the YouTube videos of yours and then try to see what the previous sessions were. Yeah, I could resonate to this this slide that you're showing now in a couple of ways. One is, as you rightly mentioned, the Agile coaches themselves get into the fixed mindset sometimes and see they get into the pattern of working on a similar style when it comes to changing the culture, right?
Yeah.
Or in Agile transformation.
Yes,
and
right.
that is one bottleneck which I think I myself have realized at some point ago, because I've been practicing for last 10 years. And sometimes I feel that I'm getting into a loop and I need to get out of it. So that's one thing I really agree. And the second thing is about the purpose.
By the way, I'm just going to slow you down for a moment. So that's a significant first step. It's like if you've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The first thing for an alcoholic is to recognize that they're an alcoholic. Yep. And the first thing for those of us who are Agile coaches is to recognize the ideology that is around which we're fixated. And you know, I'm sorry, but I have over the years have worked with a lot of Agile coaches, and I would say that a good number of them are very fixated on like how it should be. That we all have our preferences. I know I do, right? When I'm coaching somebody, I have my preference, right? And the first rule is to recognize in what ways am I being blinded by my own preferences, and what do I need to do to shake myself of that blindness? And it's not a one and done thing. It's an ongoing discipline, day-to-day practice. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to highlight something that you said in very quick passing because it's really important. All right, please.
Yep. Yeah, being self-aware is the key. I found that secret sauce. So so self-awareness, and the second point that I try to resonate here is the purpose, right? All starts with the purpose. I've been part of major Agile transformations where it did not take off well or did not go well, and we ended up with a lot of people resisting it. And we went back and start running reflections on see what went wrong, and we found that the purpose was not clear, and it was not articulated, communicated clearly, because it was people are falling under the directive way of doing things. Now I could resonate to this slide that you're saying and more well to my experience if I have to connect back a few years back and see people were completely directive. They did not want to, give the purpose to the people working at different levels in the organization, which in turn was a major blocker in the Agile transformation journey.
Yes. Thank you for that, Kartik. And just to make a couple of comments on that. So I have been lucky enough to have been involved in significant organizational transformations that were actually truly transformative. And so I said earlier that all of the stuff that I'm talking about is based on my own experience. And so I've seen it work. And the approach that we took in that organization aligns absolutely with what they're describing here as emergent, maybe a little mix of master and emergent. And the other thing that I'll say is that in this book, Sustaining Change, in their research, what they found is that those leaders and managers and organizations that took a directive or self-assembly approach were almost never, the change initiatives or transformation initiatives were almost never successful, and certainly were not successful in anything like the kind of VUCA environment that most of us are dealing with. So, I mean, you can just pretty much wipe that off the slate. It has, research has shown, and probably most of us in our own personal experience have seen this, right? Okay, good. And I want to just bear in mind what Pia brought in. We may understand this, but how do we get those others? And the thing is you can't get anyone else to do anything that they can't see for themselves. So that's the sort of background in all of this that we're talking about here. Okay, so I want to, are there any other anyone else who would like to come in at this point, because there are a couple of things I want to lay down, and I want to keep this conversational. So who else has something? Yes.
I would like to say something.
Aha.
Nice to see you again, by the way. We met years ago in the Netherlands. Just looking at this 4 different approaches to change. By the way, I'm a transformational coach, so I'm used to work with the organizations. What I see is that while yourself, or while I'm trying to create an emergent approach with the small steps and looking at what will happen if you do that, if you look at the organization in general, you probably will have a kind of combination of all these approaches.
Yes, indeed.
Because it depends on the people, leaders, indeed on different levels. Some of them are very directive, so you have to use that somehow.
Yes.
Some of them trying, especially in the teams, they're trying to find out their own way, a kind of self-assembly stuff.
Yes.
So it's a combination. It's not. It's maybe important to realize for the agile coaches that you want to be emergent, but you have to combine everything that you see.
Yes. I would completely agree. And the way I think about having an emergent approach is that it allows for all of the other approaches more generally, right? Yeah. But here's the thing. I'm thinking of how to phrase this, because I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Natasha, that it's exactly right. And what it's reflecting a kind of a nuance of approach, or like a recognition of the validity of multiple perspectives. And some perspectives work better for a given situation than others. So for instance, when I am working with a management or leadership team whose orientation is around a more directive approach, that's going to have a lot to do with the level of consciousness of the individuals in this team. So one of the things that I'm paying attention to, among many things, is what's the level of consciousness of the individuals that I'm working with, and how can I work with them in such a way that meets them where they're at, yet at the same time, in a very subtle way, kind of seduces them into a different way. And it starts with absolutely validating where people are at and starting where they're at. Kind of a little bit like what I was saying to Pia a moment ago, right? Now, if we had a lot more time, if we were doing this as a workshop, I would be spending a lot of time introducing something that's called spiral dynamics. And you may have encountered that, Natasha. Others on this Zoom line probably have encountered spiral dynamics. If you haven't, I recommend the book Spiral Dynamics by Don Beck and Chris Cowan. There's a version of that research by Frederick Laloux, which is much more popular. I find that if you go to the source of it, well, actually, spiral dynamics is not the source. The real source is Claire Graves. But Don Beck and Chris Cowan, I think, are much closer to that source. Powerful ideas in that book. I mean, life-changing ideas. And so I encountered that book actually at the very beginning when I first started doing organizational consulting. And they have this notion called the spiral wizard, which is the person that is able to see the larger picture and able to work with people where they're at. And different people and different pockets within an organization are at different places in relation, you could say, in relation to all 4 of these, right? And the overarching philosophy, if you will, is one that's congruent with what I'm describing here as emergent. Okay. Anything else, Natasha?
No, thank you. It's just thank you for the book. And in any case, I'm glad that I understood it like you wanted actually to give it to us.
Well, yeah. So we're working it out. So I actually like these kinds of sessions when they're interactive. The way we're doing it like this, and what that means is that I won't get to everything that I had intended, and but we're getting to what's showing up in the room. And my hypothesis is that when one person brings a question or a comment, usually there are 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 other people who have a similar question or comment. So we're serving the whole. Thank you.
Michael, I have one question, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yes. Who's speaking? Are you on?
This is Karthik again.
Oh, Karthik. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. May not be fully relevant to this slide, but maybe slightly. Yes. Okay. I have read some one article where they have said only 8% of the leaders in the world are able to successfully, come out with a strategy in terms of strategical thinking, and also in terms of execution. Having these dual skills, only 8% of the leaders were successful in today's world. If that were true, and if we as an agile coaches, if we have to really embark on this journey and coach the leaders in moving forward from the directive to the emergent way of working, what are the challenges do you think we have, and how do you overcome that? Maybe it's a very wide question, sorry for that, but I just want to hear your thoughts.
Right. So what I would say to that is that we as agile coaches and consultants have to continue to grow our own consciousness, our own level of consciousness. We actually have to have a rigorous practice. We're not going to be able to serve unless we do, right? So having said that, to the degree that we ourselves can see the greater complexity, to the degree that we ourselves can truly embrace multiple perspectives, and to honor people where they're at, and by honoring them, to be able to join them in relationship and validate where they're at without giving in. So to the degree that we can do that, and probably many other things which we don't have time to say, to the degree that we can grow our own consciousness as consultants and coaches and mentors, we are better able to, and I'm going to say a funny thing, to create the kind of clearing in which it becomes possible for other people to more rapidly grow themselves. So one of the things that I talk about a lot in the book is and I'll say it in a certain way right now, is to create, our job is to create scaffolding that will accelerate the growth of consciousness of people in organizations where we're working. For instance, Scrum is an example of a kind of scaffolding in terms of practices, in terms of basic, simple rules, in terms of roles. It's a kind of scaffolding that when people actually step into that and have a disciplined relationship to that, it has the effect of shifting their consciousness. So part of what happens with agile teams, with Scrum teams, when they're doing well, is that something in their own consciousness, or I'll say mindset, which is a little bit more familiar term, something in their mindset has shifted. And so you could say that Scrum is a kind of scaffolding to help people grow their capabilities, grow their inner capabilities, so that their outward behaviors are more effective in the uncertain and unpredictable environment in which they are operating. So Karthik, how is that? Does that resonate for you? Does that?
Yes, definitely. It does. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm really speaking to all of us, so that So, bottom line for all of this is that we can't get anybody else to change. What we can do, however, is by virtue of our own complexity of mind and our own capacity for skillful relationship and communication, we can create a clearing in which it becomes possible for people to shift, to upgrade their own level of consciousness, their own level of skillfulness. And ultimately, it may or may not happen within a particular company. But it certainly happens with individuals. So what I've seen over all the years is that most of the organizations I've worked with are large, many tens of thousands of people companies. Will those companies transform in total? Probably not. But will pockets within those companies transform? Yes. Will the individual people within those pockets transform and maybe elsewhere in the organization? Absolutely. And to the degree, and that's how social transformation happens. It doesn't happen by, let's transform this company. Okay, good. Now let's go to this company and transform that company. No, it doesn't work that way. We engage in activities for transformation, which in all cases will at least bring some degree of improvement in organizational performance. Meanwhile, we create conditions in which many individuals have a transformation, and they are able to step into more empowering roles for themselves where they can have a greater impact on other people. All right. Cool. Just allowing a pause.
For me, this clearly shows that that's a constant process. So
yes.
For me, it's there's still this thing in the system somehow that there's a change going on, and then the change is over, and that's just, for me, it's just a very awkward way of looking at it. So it's a way of shaping conditions and developing conditions. Then change can happen like all the time.
Yes.
So we are not into these old wave systems anymore, having changes over, good condition, okay, take some time off, and then we go into the next phase because there's change going on. So,
yeah, that's right. So what you are articulating, Inga, is a kind of a different model or different way of thinking, two different ways of thinking about change. One is the notion that change is that which happens periodically, right? So, okay, and this, by the way, this is very much a directive self-assembly, that the assumption being that change is essentially straightforward, change is episodic. Okay, we're going to go through this change initiative. Here's our goal. Once we achieve that goal, we're done with the change. That's an old world model of change that doesn't operate, can't possibly work in a VUCA world. It's based on a predict and plan sort of orientation to reality. But in fact, reality is ever emergent, ever unfolding. And we can't tell it where to go. What we can do is we can engage with other people in creating clearings or conditions in which it becomes possible for the unfolding to have a certain quality, to a certain emergent quality. That's about the best that we can do. And that includes those of us who are consultants and coaches, our relationship to our clients, who we think they should move from directive to emergent. Well, guess what? That may or may not happen. And it certainly isn't going to be up to us. What we can do is we can we can grow our own complexity of mind, we can engage, we can continuously evolve our own skillfulness in relationship and communication and conversation, we can continue to evolve our own awareness of the nature of human systems and continue to engage with other people to create new possibilities. Okay.
And there's another thought which goes further, is while I was thinking about what you said, is for me, change, like the word, the concept, or not the word, seems to be outdated, because change is a constant thing going on. So that's really living in the agile world, living in the VUCA world. So that there's a complete shift of mindset. There's a new thing coming up, and change seems to be something 10, 20 years ago or something.
Yes.
And even now, during Corona, or COVID we call it, it's here. So it's not changed. Living with the thing, what is around us.
Yes. So I would invite you, Inga, in case you haven't encountered this before, is dialectical thinking. Do a bit of a search on dialectical thinking. And for me, dialectical thinking, if there's one kind of thinking tool that we need to develop as people who do what we do, it's dialectical thinking. And I don't mean dialectical thinking in the, usually we think of it as dialogue. That's an aspect of it, but it's quite different. And I don't really have the time to go into it here, except just to, put a pointer to it, like I did a moment ago with spiral dynamics.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Well, so let's see what the next slide brings up, because I actually can't quite remember what happens next. So we'll all be surprised. I'm going to hit the down button and see what shows up. Well, elements of organizational. Okay, so let's take a look at this and see what kind of conversation this generates for us. So, so there are a number of conditions. So what we're talking about here, whether we are a consultant helping leaders and managers and teams and other people and maybe even organizational systems shift, or if we ourselves have an organizational leadership role in a company, this basically what we're talking about here is when we talk about creating, when we talk about change as emergent, we're talking about creating conditions that favor the emergence of certain human capabilities that are congruent with where, kind of like what we are all envisioning for this human system. I want to let that sink in, because that's really what we're talking about here. Regardless of our role, regardless of our relationship to the system in which we are wanting to bring about some sort of shift or transformation, that from an emergent approach, what we're up to is creating certain kinds of conditions that favor the emergence of particular human capabilities that are congruent with where it is that the organization needs to be at its best in a VUCA world. So, by the way, that's a way of speaking about the nature of emergent change that could be as applicable to large enterprises as it could be to our own families or communities. Right.
Okay. Hi, Michael.
Yes.
This is Shrikant here. Actually, I'm from India.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you turn your camera on so I can see you? Is that possible?
Yeah. Right now, my bandwidth is so low. Actually, sorry for that.
Okay.
So this is about actually we met in the Agile Mumbai when you were there actually. So with the workshop. So I heard your session over there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, greetings. If I saw your face, I could really say greetings. It's an abstraction right now. I'll take your word for it, Karthik. Okay.
Yeah. So actually, this is coming from the point of view of directive approach, which is generally, in general, is part of the most of the transformations, because
Yes.
lots of transformations happen in the top-down in the hierarchical organizations. They have the traditional thinking already, and that's where the directive really comes, like, okay, let's do a transformation, and let's move agile and all that stuff. Now, when we move there, I mean, lots of time I've seen that when people at the ground level understand it already, that whatever you are trying to do is not really working. It's not giving us any dividend, and so, but then there is no feedback mechanism in many of those scenarios where you could basically tell them that this thing is not working, and maybe this may be a kind of creating a waste of millions of dollars. So I understand your I mean, one of the points where you mentioned that you help people about their purpose, and basically, for example, let's say that about you gave the example of the metrics actually, but then in this kind of situation, I'm just thinking, like, let's say that this is happening and this is not working. People at the ground are saying that, yeah, I mean, every people, we are doing this for the heck of it.
Yes.
So in that situation, like, what do you suggest should be happening, or can happen from
well,
the?
So here's the principle, Karthik. The principle is that, by the way, I'm not saying any of this as though it's true.
Sure.
For me, it's an operating hypothesis. It helps me take a step, right? Yep. So the operating hypothesis here, underlying what I'm about to say, is that an organizational system, in order to move to a more evolved version of itself, notice what I just now said, in order to move to a more evolved version of itself, I didn't say change into something else.
Yep.
In order to move toward a more evolved version of itself, it has to settle certain conditions that it hasn't yet settled in order to even be effective where it's at. So in your example, Karthik, that organization will never be effective even with a directive approach if there's a lack of feedback between people on the ground and the people at the top. Now, that defies the ideology behind the directive approach, but it doesn't defy the inherent purpose, which is that I, as an executive leader, know where we're going, and I'm going to take us there. Now, that executive leader can't possibly be effective in achieving that goal if there are things happening on the ground of which he or she is unaware. So that feedback has to happen. And so part of your role is to help people see that without using the wiggy language that we sometimes use in the Agile world. Well, there's not enough collaboration. People operating in a directive mindset I suppose I can't say curse words. So they don't give a damn about, collaboration and, all that stuff. But what they will give a damn about is that, hey, there's things going on the ground and people are afraid to tell you because they don't want to disappoint you. What do you want to do about that? Now, I can't imagine a single directive leader who wouldn't at least give them pause to think, particularly if I can provide evidence and proof, because people operating in such a way that they are directive tend to need a lot of proof and evidence. So I need to speak their language, and I need to help them get at what's the essential thing that's preventing them from being effective even where they're at. Karthik, is that what do you think? How is that useful for you?
Yeah, this is Shrikant actually. So sorry.
Shrikant, sorry. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I think you made a really valid point that sometimes, and which is really important, that sometimes we don't really speak the language people understand or live with. We may not be understanding their context and maybe really self-obsessed about ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And in that perspective, I think sending that, I mean, sometimes it also happens like people try to give the feedback, but maybe in a different fashion, as you just mentioned, and then they may be bearing the burnt actually, and they may get fired as well.
Yes. Can you say your name again? Because I don't see you on my screen.
My name is Shrikant Vasisht, Shrikant.
Yeah, Shrikant. So yeah, beautiful Shrikant. And if I could give you some feedback, if you don't mind,
Please.
I would try to find a way for you to speak less.
Yeah.
Is it okay for me to be, I don't know, I hope that doesn't sound insulting. It's
Yes,
not meant to be insulted at all, but I found myself just my mind wandering as you were speaking. And so part of, see, here's the thing, our effectiveness in getting any kind of a message across is going to be determined by our effectiveness in relationship and communication with other people.
Sure.
Which in turn is going to be conditioned by our own complexity of mind and our own ability to let go of our attachment to our own perspectives.
Yep. Thank you.
So all of this weaves in together. So in a sense, what I'm finding us doing in this session is weaving all of the stuff we've been doing in all of these sessions together within the context of, organizational impact, which is ultimately, what we get paid for. We get paid for being able to be effective in bringing organizational impact. And that can't happen if we have an objectified view of the organization and we don't realize that our own capacity for communication and relationship, our own complexity of mind determines our effectiveness in organizational impact.
Sure.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm tempted to bring in the next slide. Let me do that, and then this will be the last kind of piece that I bring in. But I want us to continue to have these conversations. Okay, good. So I want to say something about the nature of the conditions. So we're talking about creating conditions. These are not the only ones, all right? But these are really important ones. So one of the conditions is that people are moving toward their developmental edges. So again, I'm talking about not just from the perspective of the role of the organizational manager and leader, but also ourselves as coaches and consultants, because I'm sensing that most of us on the call, that's who we are. That people everywhere engage in the change. So these are conditions that we need to be able to create, not mandate. This is not stuff you put on a wall someplace, or on a placard or on a screensaver. But these are the conditions that you, as somebody who is up to orienting transformation in systems that you're impacting, these are the conditions that we need to be able to design for, right? Blocking structures are removed, things that are blocking people, and experiments and failure are encouraged. And I want to see what this next thing, because I see the thing that's interesting is I put these slides together anticipating a certain conversation. And the nature of the conversation we're having now is quite different than that which I anticipated. So I want to be in the conversation we're having, and I'm just curious to see if this in any way helps us. All right, well, let me just say these things, and then we'll see how or if this is at all helpful in the conversation we've been having. So the kind of catalyzing practices that among the catalyzing practices that create these conditions is, first of all, to establish or to orient shared vision. And shared vision is not, I tell you what my vision is, and then you tell me if you understand it. Orienting shared vision is, there's a great story of and I'm sure there are many of them, but one that comes to mind immediately is Honda, the motor company. In the early 80s, they wanted to create a completely different kind of automobile. And rather than leadership saying, we want an automobile that has this, that, and the other thing, what they said is they just offered something really vague. I think it was something like box city car. And the whole point was to offer an image for people around which others could orient themselves, in which others could make their own sense of it. So rather than having a vision that's defined in terms of a specific goal, one way to orient vision is to have like not clearly specified vision, but something that allows enough space for other people to find where does that match with my own vision. So the second one is identifying and empowering champions. And by champions, I mean, these are people. So whenever I go into organizations, the thing that I am paying attention to is who are the people who are like excited about this new direction. People who are connected to it, people who are willing to take committed action in relation to it. I want to identify them and empower them. So I want to get together with them, have conversations with them, and find out what is it that they're up to, and how can I support them in bringing about some sort of shift in their own, perhaps very limited domain. And then finally, engineering breakdowns. So what I oftentimes see in leaders that have a more emergent orientation is they want to stress the system. So there's a book called Anti-Fragile, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, maybe even all of you. And one of the things that I can't remember the author's last name, Taleb, I think it is. One of the things that he stresses is that for the most part, what we do in our organizations is we try to make them resistant to any sort of volatility. And he suggests that rather than doing that, we want to have organizations be able to tolerate volatility. And one of the ways to do that is to engineer breakdowns. And so I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. There was an executive leader that I worked with once, and they had been, this was many years ago actually, they had, I think, 10 agile teams in this part of the organization. And they were really struggling with their throughput. And so what he did, he took the teams down from 10 down to 7. And the product management started screaming and saying, you're just doing that to cut costs. No, he was doing that to stress the system, to help those teams, first of all, to help those teams get more innovative around being able to create better throughput. And at the same time, forcing product development managers to start to make key business decisions. Because when we have tremendous amount of capacity in a system, what that allows for is a kind of a sloppiness in focus. And so what he was doing was creating conditions that forced teams to become more innovative in how they work together to create greater throughput. And at the same time, creating conditions in which product managers more or less were forced to make key business decisions. We can't deliver all of these products. What are the ones that would give us the most business value and from which results we could learn the most? So I'm putting that out there, and now I just want to find out what sort of thing that this will, what conversation or what questions or thoughts or comments does this elicit for us? Or anything else, really, because we're kind of coming to the close here. Feel free to take a screenshot of this if you'd like.
I just would like to show you the German version of the book that Michael just mentioned, Anti-Fragile. So here
Yes.
it is. And I haven't started reading it yet, but it's next on my book list.
Yeah, even if you just read I think it's the prelude. The book is an incredibly fanciful book. It requires a lot of patience to read. But if you just read like the first, I can't remember, first 20, 25 pages, really, really powerful insights there. Cool. What else? So we're going into a kind of like a Q&A kind of thing. And I just want to find out. Yep. Sounded like a child. Okay.
Michael, this is Shaheen.
Yes, hi Shaheen. Good to see you.
Hi. Yeah, same here. So I just wanted to thank you to introducing me to the Quadrant, because in one of the clients that we were working with, we kind of emerged from the.
Hold on just a second. I'm going to interrupt. Just want to bring everybody in. You mean the 4 quadrants?
Yes.
Yes. So the 4 quadrants, just for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, is the integral 4 quadrants.
No, the one that you just showed.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. Good.
So
okay.
We moved in one of the clients. We used the top left and the bottom right, but we didn't pay attention the 2 other ones. So we defined that if there are some that is top down changes that is coming in, let that be it. But let some of the changes be at the team level and self-organized level. But we didn't think of the other 2 dimensions that it has. So it was very eye-opening for me for the next time that having these conversations, that there are not only 2, but there are more to it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome, Shaheen. And just to make a brief comment about that this is why I find like there are people doing research in the area of organizational theory, organization development, and even like I find the ideas in organization theory, which may seem theoretical, to be just incredibly powerful in this domain. And the newer theories, I mean, it's totally mind-blowing. And I have been totally informed by this stuff from the very beginning. And I have been over the years really, really effective in helping organizations create conditions that bring about emergent transformation. And I give my thanks to the research that countless dozens, hundreds of people toiling away in academic institutions doing this research for us. It's really, really important that we be informed about this. Otherwise, we're just going to end up being stupid. Sorry. Anyways.
Hi, Michael. This is Karthik here from Singapore.
Yes. Hi, Karthik.
Hi. I have a question with respect to the engineering breakdowns that you just explained a few minutes back. And I just want to understand whether it's similar to the Chaos Monkey by Netflix.
Chaos Monkey? I don't know Chaos Monkey.
Oh, okay. That's basically it's an experiment they were doing for on a system to withstand unexpected and turbulent conditions. It's looks like it's similar to the one that you explained with respect to the engineering breakdowns, because you said more of stress testing and giving more,
Yeah. So creating stress in a system is one of the ways to help it be able to be more what Taleb calls anti-fragile. So for instance, like with coronavirus, there's a certain part of me that wants to expose myself to more germs so that I can become, my system can become better able to deal with whatever germs that come in that might be hard on my system. That's what he means. What he means by anti-fragile is not merely resilient, but that which grows by being exposed to volatility. And so, like, for instance, I can think of myself as having grown, expanded my consciousness as a result of the crisis that we're in, and the various personal crises that I've been in. Cool, thank you.
Yep. I have a follow-up question.
I want to just see if there's somebody else who wants to come in, because I want to just be sure that sometimes some people are more quiet and they need a little more time. So is that okay, Karthik?
Yeah, sure. I'm okay with that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you. Who else? Now somebody else you need to step in. I know there are others there who want to come in. Who is that?
Yeah, I will.
Jan, hi.
Well, good afternoon. Hi, good morning, whatever. One thing that was wandering through my mind is that what we've discussed today is basically something that a servant leadership is required to actually create an emergent approach to handling organizations. And this again spurred the idea that leaders should get rid of their pride, that they are leaders, and instead put trust into the others that they are working with.
Yes, can I just make an adjustment, fine tuning of the language of that?
Okay.
Yeah. So and so the premise, by the way, in fine tuning the language is that how we speak determines how we think. I'd like to suggest, right? And so I would rather not want to get rid of pride and actually find, so this is going to be a little bit of a mind bender, Jan. You okay with that?
Sure. Bend it.
Yeah. So yeah, because the mind needs to be bent. To find within the pride, what was the other word that you contrasted with pride? Trust.
Trust.
Yeah, to find within that pride the trust, the ability to trust, which is really ultimately the ability to let go of my attachment. It may have little to do with pride. So we want to be careful about, how we're identifying things.
Okay. Yeah. Just a small thought, then pride maybe should be replaced by attachment to status.
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, it's a little more precise, right? Isn't it? Or it's a little more relevant to the particular thought that you are wanting to enliven. Yeah. Cool. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see that we're at the end of our time here, and I am really enjoying the conversation we're having, and I don't know if this is possible, but I could stay on and another 10 minutes for those who would like to stay on and just continue the conversation a bit more. And if there's nobody who wants to do that, or if that's not possible from Holisticon's perspective, we can just simply say au revoir until later. So are there people who would like to stay on a little longer? Well, first of all, let me just check with Maret and Christian and Sebastian. Is that possible? Okay.
I side too. It's no problem.
Okay. So who would like to stay on? Raise your hand if you'd like to stay on another 10 minutes just to continue the conversation. Okay. All right, so let's continue. And those who need to drop off, thank you for being here. And
Thank you.
see
Goodbye.
you.
Thank
Look
you very
forward to seeing you around.
much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so what wants to be asked or said? Maybe we're hoping that somebody else had an interesting comment or question that could trigger the conversation.
And let me jump in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to raise the question, what now? You know, we have a four-part webinar series with you.
Yes.
And we only scratched a lot of things. So what do you propose one should do after this webinar series?
Well, you know, we live in an extreme VUCA world, and it's a little, I wouldn't say it's quite hard to say, but what I would suggest is there are a couple of things that we're looking at putting together. And by we, I mean me and folks at Holisticon. And to deepen this work. And there are a couple of things we're thinking of. And how many people, raise your hand if you think you might be interested in hearing more about what those things could be, or maybe even you think you might be interested in participating in such a thing. Okay. So,
Michael, could you stop sharing your screen so we can go into
yes,
gallery view and see each other?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Sorry about that. I was completely absent-minded because I figured out how I could see everybody, but obviously you couldn't see everybody. Yeah. So here's what will likely happen, and is that we'll put together. So we're going to put our heads together as to a couple of different things that we could offer, and we'll send an email out to people who've been on this series, and just share with you what we're thinking. And my request is that you not just read the email and put it into some kind of bin, but that you actually respond. And if what we're proposing is something that somehow doesn't align with what you are wanting, that you reply back. It could just even be briefly, you know, like, this sounds interesting, but here's what I was hoping for. And because we're wanting to do this as a kind of a dialogue, rather than the sort of unilateral, here's what we're doing, sign up. More like, here's what we're thinking. How does this align with where you're wanting to go? Knowing, by the way, that not everybody's entirely clear. So part of our job is to provide a clear possibility, and then find out, you know, to what degree and in what ways that resonates and what it is you'd want. So would you be willing to do that? And I'm speaking, by the way, not just to those who are with us right now, but even people watching the recording. Yeah? Getting kind of lukewarm. Okay. Okay, cool. What else? We have a few more minutes. Yeah, thank you, Barbara. What else? What wants to be said or asked?
Michael Vispier. So I'm trying to, in my head, I'm trying to wrap up and summarize a lot of what you kind of covered. And I suppose what I'm starting with is in the 4-quadrant change model you had there earlier, in a VUCA world, it sounds like the emergent model is the one that would tend to be more likely to succeed.
Yeah. Yes, well, that's what the research.
Yeah.
That's what the research. That's what the people who did the research have found, and other researchers have found have made similar findings, and that's certainly been my experience. Now, I want to condition that by saying that we are, as consultants, people who are helping leaders engage in the change process, we ourselves have to be emergent in that approach. We have to take that approach ourselves. So, for instance, we have to start where they're at, and we have to be willing to help them go to where what's a natural place for that system to go. So it's a little bit like when you plant a garden, you want to create conditions for the plants to grow in a certain way, but you can't tell the plants how to grow. You do it by creating the conditions. And what we're talking about here is that this is always about creating conditions in which it becomes possible for people to choose the change that's right for them. Some plants, like we started a garden, and some plants are super tall, some are like really short. Some lose a bunch of leaves when we have a freeze. Like this morning we had a freeze. Believe it or not, it was below 0 centigrade here where I live this morning. And so you can't determine the change that's natural for another person. But that doesn't mean that you just stand there and do nothing. We're just as active in creating the conditions that make it possible to choose that change which is right for them. And it may move in a certain direction. Like, for instance, I prefer that people move in the direction of greater complexity, or organizations move toward greater complexity, because I know that it enables them to be able to perform and function more powerfully and more effectively in a VUCA world. But how exactly that's going to happen, what time scale that's going to happen, and how it's going to end up looking, I can't decide. I know that there are things that we can do, there are conditions we can create that would accelerate that process of development. Like, so for instance, I have 9-month programs that I do with people, and the promise is that people will have a significant developmental transformation during the course of that 9 months. That I know that in that program, I can create conditions that accelerate the rate at which people grow and develop. And in workshops that we do, I do workshops, and then I partner with Michael Spade, who many of you I think know. We do workshops and programs that also accelerate the rate at which people can move to a greater complexity. But how that looks exactly for them, we don't know. And we can't push and force people to move toward that greater complexity. We can create an environment in which that becomes possible when the conditions favor that. And it's my operating presumption, I don't say that this is true, but it's an operating presumption that living systems naturally want to evolve toward ever greater complexity. That's just the nature. And when that's not happening, there's either some conditions that need to be there that aren't there, or there's something that is arresting. There's something that has to get settled for that system or for that person. Is that at all helpful? Well, I assume that it's helpful, Visby. How is that helpful?
Yeah, I can relate to it. I mean, it also brings me back to another point that you mentioned about becoming aware of what is, because Like if you're working with a cactus, then the environment you want to create is very different to if you're working with an oak or an acorn or something like that.
Yes,
so
that's right.
So, and they will evolve differently as well. Yeah.
I can see that there are wheels spinning in your head. That thoughts are happening that are interesting to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we can hear from one last person, and then we'll close this.
I don't want to read the last one. I just had
Okay.
a thought from yours, just while you were saying that. I think we cannot underestimate the role of vision as a condition for people to be able to change, because like having a vision, having a picture, or having a purpose
Yes.
is for me like having a path and showing people where is the way going, and making people understand what is going on, because some people in the system don't understand what is going on in the bigger world. Right. So from your discussion, I realized that it's a condition for me.
Yes, absolutely. So that's why orienting shared vision was one of the catalyzing practices there, and so absolutely. And what I would add to that, based on an aspect of what you were speaking about, is that in a leadership role, when we, if kind of like our orienting approach is that, it's kind of like what they describe as emergent, we have to recognize that different people need different styles of leadership. So one kind of failure mode that I see with leaders and managers that adopt this more adaptive style of leadership is a failure to recognize that different people require different kinds of leadership. Some people need a more directive style. So different pockets within the organization expect different styles of leadership. And so we need to practice this sort of openness and emergence in our own approaches to leadership. So for instance, some people do need to be told. And as long as we understand the larger frame, the larger leadership orientation as that which includes lots of different approaches, then sure, there'll be times when we can be and need to be a bit more declarative and descriptive, and even to some degree, perhaps even directive. But we understand it as a kind of a crutch, a kind of a bridge to help people get to a different place.
Okay, it seems now like we're now really are at the end. And I would like to use this moment to again thank you, Michael, for your time and your wisdom and your contributions. And I love to see how wheels started spinning in people's heads during the webinars, and we really appreciate you taking your time and collaborating with us. So again, thank you. And also all the participants who are here, thank you for your curiosity and your openness and your will to shift your minds and learn new things.
Yeah, and thank you both to those who are here, those who were with us during the main part of the session, and then people who've been in previous sessions, and then of course everybody watching the recordings. Thank you.
And of course, also thank you to my Holisticon colleagues that we did this together.
Yes. Yeah, that was going to be my final thank you is to Christian and Maret and Sebastian, really for making this happen. This was really, for me, it was a pleasure. So thank you, Holisticon, and well, Christian and Maret and Sebastian.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Yeah, and to those of you who aren't connected with me and the others yet, let's stay in touch. We're glad to meet you on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever you are.
Good. Okay, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye, Michael.